seconds. I do not have a range safety internal and on. I have them now. Holding momentarily at 1 minute 35 seconds. All three start lights are green. Slug start. Mark. Mark. High topping. 1 minute 35 seconds and counting. Gauge verify high topping. Starting flight pressurization. 10. Burner blades open. 20. Minus 105. Mark. Medium to internal. Power to internal. T-minus 60 seconds and hold it momentarily. 40. Mark. Slug complete. Plug man. Roger. Have a slug complete. 60 seconds and counting. Minus 55 seconds. Mark. All right away. Minus 50 seconds. Mark. Status check. Pressurization. Go. Missile power. Go. Hydraulics. Go. Re-entry vehicle. Go. Thank you. Minus 40 seconds. Mark. Thank you, SRO. Minus 30 seconds. Mark. Box valve closed. Launch commit lights are correct at this time. Minus 10 seconds. Mark. All recorders to pass. Minus 5 seconds. Mark. 5 seconds and holding momentarily. I have a commit arm light. T-minus 5 seconds and counting.
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mission start.
Hey everyone, it's Mayor Robert Garcia, and I want to welcome all of you to Accelerate Long Beach. Of course, we're talking about space and technology. Thank you to the Long Beach Economic Partnership for these amazing events.
Accelerate Long Beach, Space and Technology. Presented by Boeing.
Our airport is steeped in tradition, but it's also a vital and very busy part of the Los Angeles Basin transportation system. In fact,
And I want to just really think about the past and the future coming together in space for the city. You think about flight, about aviation, about technology, and all the amazing jobs that have grown around our airport and our port over the last few years and decades. And then you think about the future. The future is about satellites, it's about rockets, it's about space. And Long Beach is engaged in the middle of that. We have become a hub on the West Coast for this amazing work. Long Beach is growing and will continue to grow. As we like to call it now, Space Beach around this industry is really the future of so many good jobs here and across the region.
Accelerate Long Beach, Space and Technology. Presented by Boeing and brought to you by Long Beach Economic Development Department, Downtown Long Beach Alliance, California State University Long Beach Office of Economic Research, and the Port of Long Beach.
Plasidyne Engineering is a plastic machining facility specializing in the machining of Teflon and related plastic materials.
We have some parts in the space shuttle, satellites. We also have parts that are in hydraulics.
In your rockets and aircraft. We do a lot of our parts go into flight controls.
I've been here for 40 years plus. As the company started originally in the garage of my father.
The Teflon was just getting popular. There wasn't a whole lot of people that did what we did.
Some of the people are still here today that were here when I was little. You know, they got to see me grow up from what I was, a little kid pushing a broom around the shop, to where I am now in the business.
It just kind of grew over the years. We, thank God we kept up with the times.
You have to enjoy what you do, because when we were young, we were taught we're going to be doing it for a long time. So we took pride in our work and pride in the company to make it what it is today.
I graduated from California State University, Long Beach in 2007, and ever since I was a little girl, I knew that I wanted to work on really cool space stuff.
Virgin Orbit is a space company focused on the small satellite community and the capabilities that they can bring to orbit. Space systems really bond the whole globe together and make us a more efficient species. We've developed a launch system unlike any other. A 747 aircraft can take off from a runway any place in the world and put a satellite up into any orbit. And on January 17th, we, for the first time in history, took off from a runway in Southern California and deposited 10 research satellites for NASA 500 kilometers above Earth. We'll be moving that forward and serving more customers. We'll be launching from the UK, Japan, Brazil, and other countries, all coming from a factory here in Long Beach, California.
When we can innovate together and really leverage our differences, that's when we can build out of this world technology.
The amount of aerospace expertise in the area is unmatched. And we have a team unlike any other because we built here.
Good morning. My name is Mark Taylor, and I serve as the Director of Government Operations for Boeing in California. Boeing is delighted to be the sponsor of Accelerate Long Beach Space and Technology. As the largest aerospace employer in Long Beach, we play a huge role in this local economy, supporting thousands of jobs, as well as spending $86 million annually with our 40 local suppliers. So I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here. It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Kleinhenz. A leading voice on the economy at the national, state, and local levels, Robert brings more than 3 decades of experience to his economic studies and policy analysis. He is a frequent contributor on CNBC, Bloomberg, NPR, and other media outlets across the country. He leverages data-informed forecasts to help people understand what's happening in different industry sectors and where the economy is headed. Robert is a University of Southern California graduate, an adjunct professor of economics, and the Associate Director of the Office of Economic Research at Cal State Long Beach. He is also the founder of the firm Kleinhenz Economics and previously served as the Executive Director of Research with Beacon Economics. He was also the Chief Economist for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation and Deputy Chief Economist with the California Association of Realtors. Believing that knowledge is power, he strives to help local business leaders and the community at large feel more certain about what's ahead. We're grateful to have him here with us today. Take it away, Dr. Kleinhenz.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about the economy. Of course, this is the Economic Forum for the second quarter of this year. I'll be talking about the U.S. and California economy. Here we are, June 17th, just a couple days after the reopening of the state economy. And so there's no better time than right now to take a look at where we've been and to take a look at where we're headed. So with that in mind, we'll be talking about the U.S. economy, where recovery is well underway. Many other parts of the country reopened before California, more fully reopened in these last couple of days. But California is ramping up, and so as you'll see, we expect to see that when we move further through the year, 2021 and into 2022, we'll see recovery really take hold throughout California. So let's begin by taking a look at what's happening now in the United States economy. And you know, there are many different news streams that we all follow, but they all seem to revolve these days around a handful of hot topics, one of which is how soon the U.S. economy is going to fully recover. What about inflation? What about interest rates? And what about the deficit? So let's take each of these in turn, and we'll have a similar sort of set of questions for the California economy. So how soon will we recover? Well, we've got good news on that front, at least as far as economic activity is concerned. Over on the left-hand side, you can see GDP by level. So $19.3 trillion on the far left-hand side was the level of economic activity just before the Great Recession. And those next two bars that you're looking at show what happened during the first half of last year when we lost $2 trillion of economic activity. But soon after that, moving into the second half of last year, and into the first quarter of this year, we've seen that the economy has been in a recovery mode. It's been adding to GDP. And we fully expect recovery of lost GDP by the second quarter of this year. So that's you know, the end of June of this year. So that's good news. And over on the right-hand side, you can see the annual growth rates for GDP. Had been averaging about 2.5% growth for the last several years leading into the pandemic downturn. Last year, we lost GDP to the tune of 3.5%, the biggest drop since the 1940s. So indeed, it was a severe but very sharp and short-lived decline, really limited to that first half of last year. And since then, we've been growing nicely. And for all of 2021, we expect to see the fastest pace of growth we've seen in about 35 years. So 6.5% is what you see here. And even that's a conservative outlook. And next year also will be a year of above average growth. So the trajectory from this point forward doesn't just look promising, it's really more on the optimistic side, at least as far as economic activity is concerned. Now, part of that is driven by consumer spending. Consumers make up 2/3 of the spending in the economy. And what you see here is, again, in that first half of last year, consumer expenditures pulled back. That's what you're looking at with those red bars. The pullback in spending really hit services hard. So here we're talking about the things we've heard so much about. We're talking about restaurants. We're talking about entertainment venues, personal services, and the like. And that segment of consumer spending has yet to recover. But even as we were not spending our funds, our money on those things, we were spending money on consumer goods. So buying cars, buying home appliances, any number of other things to equip the home in which we found ourselves spending so much time. And so goods spending actually really took off and continues to be elevated at this point in time. That'll likely level out some as we go through the next several quarters, and we'll see real recovery happen with respect to services. So all of that's good news for the economic activity measures that we typically track, notably gross domestic product or GDP. Even the unemployment rate has improved quite a bit over the last several months, so that's good news, but the labor market has a ways to go before it's fully recovered. So on the left-hand side, you can see during the pandemic shutdown, the unemployment rate rose sharply from 3.5% to 14.8%. So that's what happened in the labor market. And on the jobs front, the wage and salary job count for the U.S. economy fell from about 153 million jobs to about 130 million jobs. So a loss of 22 million jobs over the span of just 2 months. Now we've clawed back quite a few of those jobs and we're still about 8 million short. We will recover those jobs in the next several quarters, but it's likely to be sometime in 2022 before we fully recover the jobs that were lost during the spring 2020 pandemic shutdown. And that unemployment rate, it's now 5.8%. We fully expect to see that improve in the coming months, even as the labor force grows when people go back to work or back to looking for work. But we expect to see that the unemployment rate could easily drop below 5% as we close out 2021 and move into 2022. In fact, if all of the leisure and hospitality workers in the United States that are out of work currently were able to go back to work immediately, the unemployment rate would actually drop considerably from the 5.8% that you see here right now. And that just points to the importance of seeing that particular sector heal. It was where most of the jobs were lost during the pandemic shutdown, and it's also the area where that has been the slowest to recover. Now, there have been concerns about the pace of recovery. The Fed has even said that it's expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million jobs created per month as we move through the recovery phase. To me, that's a bit on the optimistic side. If you take a look at our most recent experience, the Great Recession, in the months since jobs bottomed out, that's what we're looking at here. In the 13 months after job counts bottomed out, both in the Great Recession and in the pandemic shutdown, we saw job growth during the Great Recession, or in the aftermath of the Great Recession, to the tune of about 122,000 jobs per month. Now, so far in these last 13 months that we're talking about here for the pandemic, we've added jobs to the tune of 1.1 million. But as you see, we had a big spike back in June. That would have been June, the second month there, of 2020. If you take that out, you take out that big spike that occurred then, we're looking at average job growth somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600,000 per month. That seems like a more likely target for us. And with that in mind, and with 8 million jobs to be recovered, it looks like sometime in 2022, maybe by the end of the second quarter of 2022, we may fully recover the jobs that were lost. To expect 1 million jobs per month in this recovery mode, I think, would be quite exceptional. So we're on the road to recovery, whether we're looking at economic activity or we're looking at jobs or other kinds of economic indicators. We're also concerned about inflation. There are a lot of questions about inflation and interest rates, so let's take a look at those. Here you're looking at annual inflation rates for the last several years, and over on the far right-hand side you can see the year-to-date inflation figure, which is 3%. In April, the most recent available data, we saw that overall inflation based on the CPI was up by 5%. But really for all of this year, we think that inflation is going to be in the 3 to 3.5% range. This current spike that we're seeing with the CPI and with some of the producer prices climbing so high, these are all likely to be transitory effects as we work out the kinks in the supply chain, as supply catches up with demand. These kinds of things inevitably occur as we come out of a downturn and recover. And evidence of that from the Great Recession is on the far left-hand side of your screen, where you can see that in 2011, when we were finally making our way forward in recovering from the Great Recession, inflation that year was a little over 3%. So runaway inflation, not in the cards. Elevated inflation for the next several months, very likely, but still in the single-digit range. The key is that our inflation expectations don't get too far ahead of things, because if our inflation expectations, that is to say our expectations for the inflation rate in the future, get out of hand, then we have an additional concern. Core inflation also appears here. It's very much in control, below 3%. We expect it to be in the neighborhood of 2.5% over the balance of this year. So The inflation situation looks good, even despite the worries that have been expressed in so many reports lately. And that's also important for interest rates. Interest rates in part depend on the expected rate of inflation. They also depend on economic growth or the expectation of economic growth. So we're expecting the economy to grow. We're also expecting some inflation. So there should be some lift in interest rates in the coming months. But again, nothing that is going much beyond low single-digit interest rates, really fundamentally reflecting the fact that the economy is recovering and growing. So higher interest rates are in the cards. Interest rates that are going through the roof, definitely not in the cards. So the expectation is that we'll be just fine over the next several months. And we're still in a very low interest rate environment, historically low interest rates. If you take a look at the 30-year mortgage, which appears here in green, and you take a look at the yield on the 10-year Treasury. Worries about the deficit. Well, what about the deficit? In 2020, we had a $3 trillion plus federal budget deficit. In 2021, the projection as of February was about $2.5 trillion. It's likely to push past $3 trillion this year. But then in the next several years, we're expecting to see that the budget deficit will retreat to the neighborhood of $1 trillion. That's about 4% of GDP. That's equivalent to about 4% of GDP, which is right in line with the long-run 40-year average that we've seen. So as far as that's concerned, the fact that the deficit's going to return to the kinds of background levels that we've seen over the last several decades, that's a good thing. Now, the deficit is indeed higher than it used to be. And the concerns going forward are, how are we going to pay for it? Well, interest rates right now are very low, so paying that deficit or servicing the national debt is relatively cheap. The question is, does it crowd out any kind of other activity, other spending that might benefit U.S. residents? If it does, then we should be concerned about it. When times are good, not now, but when times are good, when we're expanding as an economy, then that's when we should be looking at relying less on deficit spending and maybe bringing our balances more current. But that's not a concern for today, not a concern for 2021, likely not a concern in 2022. So the U.S. economy is on track with its recovery. By the second quarter, by the end of this month, we expect a fully recovered GDP. The labor market's looking good. All of this is good when we look at California's picture through the U.S. lens. So how big has the hit been to the California economy, and how soon will the state's economy recover? We've heard a lot about the decline in population in recent weeks, and over the last several years, of course, we're constantly hearing about companies leaving California. So the question is, has California lost its competitive edge? We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then we'll finish up by talking about housing. So how big was the hit to California? Not unlike the U.S., we saw the unemployment rate skyrocket in the months of spring 2020. We saw the unemployment rate before the pandemic disruption in the neighborhood of 4%. It basically quadrupled to 16% in the span of just a couple of months. We lost 2.5 million jobs over that time period. I should say 2.7 million jobs. Of which we've recovered about 1.3 million so far, so a little bit less than half. So the California economy is definitely moving in the right direction, but it's moving more slowly than the U.S. because we've been much more restrictive and conservative in our approach to dealing with the pandemic. So June 15th was a very important day because so much of California, which had been under various kinds of restrictions, is now fully or nearly fully open. So we expect the next several months to be a time period where California's economy really takes off. So you can see on the right-hand side, the unemployment rate is currently at 8.3%, so it's about half where it was during the worst days of the pandemic's shutdown last spring. You can see that the job picture is quite a bit improved, 16.3 million jobs. So we have about 1.4 million jobs to recover. we've recovered about 40% of the jobs lost so far to date. And you can see how that compares with the U.S. picture. So the U.S. as a whole has recovered about 2/3 of the jobs that it lost during the pandemic shutdown last spring. As I mentioned during my remarks on the U.S. picture, leisure and hospitality was the hardest hit, and it still has the biggest gap. So it accounts for the largest number of those 1.4 million jobs that we have yet to recover, followed by government. So in that case, what happened was that state and especially local government anticipated that their revenue streams were going to just dry up during the pandemic. And so as a result, they began to lay workers off. And so there have been job losses at all levels of government, but especially at the local level over the last several months. The budget picture looks much better for both, obviously for the state and also for local government. So we expect to see that 213,000 job loss figure close or be reduced rather quickly. Other services includes things like getting your hair cut, nail salons, things like that. And as you know, the health restrictions that were in place during the shutdown really limited our ability to take advantage of those services. So again, that's one of those areas of the economy that was hard hit. We expect to see it recover just as fast as people are comfortable with getting out there and engaging in face-to-face activities with so many individuals that provide these personal services. If there's one area of the economy that has done well through all of this, it's transportation and warehousing. With all of us sitting at home and working from home, more and more of us relied quite a bit more heavily on online purchases. And so that's just given rise to elevated job levels in distribution, warehousing, of course, shipping. And so transportation and warehousing has done well. It was the one sector of the economy that really added jobs over the year 2020, even as so many other sectors of the economy lost jobs. We continue to be worried about households, especially households that have either no jobs or have limited pay to help them cover their bills. Small businesses are also still struggling. And keep in mind that a lot of the small businesses are also in those very industries that you see over on the left-hand side, delivering personal services, opening restaurants or running restaurants, things like that. So as those sectors of the economy get going again, we would expect to see the fortunes improve for a small business. Female labor force participation has been a real concern during the pandemic. With kids having to take their schooling at home, somebody in the family has had to stay at home with them. So adults in the household, oftentimes it's been women who've stayed at home, who have left the labor force. So we're hopeful that labor force participation on the part of women is going to improve in the coming months as we find kids returning to school. The bottom line is that California has been recovering a bit more slowly than the U.S. Up to this point, we really expect to see recovery acceleration in the state as we go through the balance of the year, not just because we've reopened as of June 15th, but also because some of our very important sources of growth, some of our leading industries, including tech and transportation and so on, are likely to really take off as we get further into this year and move into 2022. When you look across the regions of California, you see a varied picture. And the bottom line is that unlike most past economic downturns, where the California coast led the way in recovery, in this economic recovery, we've seen many inland regions lead the way. So at the very top, you see that Stockton-Lodi has already recovered about 3/4 of the jobs that it lost during the shutdown. The Inland Empire, about 2/3. You have to go all the way down to the bottom of the list to see that LA County has only recovered about 1/3, 36% of the jobs that it lost during the shutdown. So we have a ways to go here in Los Angeles County. But again, we need to understand why we're looking at that number. And that's because we have a high concentration of employment in arts and entertainment, in other aspects of leisure and hospitality. So that tourism part of our economy, as that comes back to life in the next several weeks, we expect to see that job growth is going to pick up, and in particular, leisure and hospitality will pick up, and some of the other important sectors of the LA County economy will pick up, and that's going to help Long Beach as well. It turns out that California, even with the restrictions, has been tracking fairly closely with the U.S. in terms of GDP activity, gross domestic product. And so we really expect to see that California is going to recover lost economic activity probably sometime later on this year, so maybe a quarter or two behind the U.S. in terms of its trajectory. And then as far as the unemployment rate is concerned, we would expect to see sometime in 2022, maybe a little bit later than the U.S. as a whole, that the unemployment rate is going to come down and probably drop below 5%. So, you know, we've got good news. We're cautiously optimistic about where the economy is going. But at this stage, you know, it's a huge improvement over the circumstances that we've seen in the last several months. So what about California's competitive edge? So we're going to look at two things. One, we're going to look at population, and two, we're going to look at the story as it relates to the state's businesses. So first, you know, you probably heard that California lost population in 2021 based on the latest estimate for the first time in about 100 years. So here you see the population for the state, 39.5 million. We lost about 182,000 in population from 2020 to 2021. First time in 100 years that this has occurred. So all sorts of alarm signals have gone up. Well, let's take a look and see what's actually happened. And we don't have data for 2021 in this figure, but I think we can figure out what happened in 2021 based on the recent history over the last several years. So here you've got the components of population change for the state. We have natural increases, which are due to the difference between births and deaths. That appears here in blue. And then we have net change in migration, which is the sum of state-to-state migration and international in-migration. So even before the pandemic hit, we saw that the natural increase in California was slowing, partly due to the fact that we've got a slightly older population, so we have fewer childbirths that are occurring. And so that's part of the reason why those blue bars are getting smaller. And in the pandemic year, 2020, of course, that blue bar really dropped. So both because we were seeing fewer births and also because we were seeing elevated deaths, okay? So then what really makes the difference is this net change due to migration. For years, we've had international in-migration offset state-to-state outflows so that on balance, we end up with a population gain. But you can see in the last couple of years, we actually have lost migration, lost population as a result of migration. You move into 2021, you've got the slower natural growth rate coupled with heightened levels of outmigration, and those taken together gave rise to a 0.5% decline of 182,000 persons in our population growth rate. We really expect that this is going to turn around as we move into 2022. The sources of growth will recover. If there's any chance that we can rework our immigration policy, a problem which is probably decades overdue, that will help California because we need a sound immigration policy to enable the immigrants that make up our economy and contribute not just to our population but to our overall economic activity. We need that source of growth in the California economy going forward. So we expect to see a turnaround in population in 2022. As for the notion that businesses are leaving California because it's a less competitive environment than other places around the country, well, there's obviously some truth to that. But when you look at certain numbers, it really becomes evident that we continue to be a very dynamic economy. Here you're looking at new business establishments. That's the black line. So on average over the last several years, using the left-hand side axis, you can see that California has added about 180,000 new businesses each year for the last several years. The latest data, as you see here, is 2019. Now, businesses go out of business as well. So I'm also showing you the net gain in new establishments, which is the blue bars, and you can see that we add about 30,000 new businesses each year here in the state of California. So we continue to have a vibrant, dynamic economy here in California. Entrepreneurship is very much alive, and if you just take a look at one indicator to tell you what's happening here, take a look at venture capital. This is last year's venture capital, and in the United States, a total of $133 billion of venture capital was distributed across the states, of which about half came here to California. Now, a large portion of that went to the Bay Area, somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 50 billion. Another 10 billion came to Los Angeles County, with the balance sort of distributed between San Diego, Orange County, and other parts. But the bottom line is that if this weren't a place where growth happens, where new ideas are turned into commercial reality, we wouldn't see the flow of venture capital to the state of California that you're seeing here. So we can't believe everything we read, and even the things that we do read that have some credibility, we definitely need to get more context in order to better understand what we're learning. So what about housing? Well, this is also a topic that's very much in the news. Home sales, as well as home prices, seemingly are going through the roof. Home prices, so the April home price for California was up 34% to over $800,000, and sales were up 65%. But keep in mind that April was we were comparing April against the trough in sales that you see for the year ago time period when we were going through the worst days of the spring pandemic shutdown. So as we move through the rest of the year, we're likely to see both smaller percentage gains in home prices and smaller percentage gains in home sales as well. So this is going to be an okay, maybe a good year for home sales and certainly for home prices. It's a seller's market, if you want to use that term. And part of that has to do with the fact that the supply of homes continues to be extremely lean. But let's not forget that low interest rates really benefit would-be home buyers greatly. And so that's why we're seeing such demand for homes at the present time. But even with very low interest rates, and we expect that to continue to be the case for the foreseeable future, you can see here that affordability has fallen. So for Los Angeles County, a year ago, first quarter of 2020, 31% of households could afford the median priced home. Shift forward to the first quarter of this year, January through March of this year, the share of households that could afford the median priced home had fallen to a quarter. And you can see why when you take a look at the numbers. The median home price in the first quarter was about $680,000. The monthly payment was in the neighborhood of $3,100. And with that monthly payment, the minimum required income was about $124,000, well above the median household income for households in Los Angeles County. And you can see the numbers for the rest of the region as well as for the state and for the U.S. Let's face it, we're in a high-cost region, we're in a high-cost state, and there's no easy fix to this problem. We are seeing home construction occur. It's up 25% over a year ago, so that's good news, but it's still well below what we expect or what we need in order to really add to the stock of housing in a meaningful way. And we will have lingering challenges in the coming years. We've got households that are still going to have to resolve back payments for mortgages, back rent, things like that. And as these households work through these things, they're also having to reconcile the fact that they may have been on reduced wages over the last several months. So there are some challenges ahead for households. Of course, there also are challenges ahead for the property owners and the landlords because they have to work with their lenders to iron things out as well. We just need to keep in mind that California continues to have a serious chronic housing shortfall. On the left-hand side, you can see that from 1990 to 2020, population grew by about 43%. We also saw the economy grow and add jobs to the tune of 29%. But the housing stock only grew by 28% over that same time period. So, you know, it's a lot more complicated than what you're seeing on the screen, but the bottom line is that our production of housing simply hasn't kept up with the pace of population growth, nor with the pace of job growth. And so this is obviously a problem we've had for a long time, for many decades, something that won't be resolved overnight, but it's certainly something we're going to have to tackle just as soon as we get the pandemic behind us. So as we wrap up, we'll take a look at these questions one more time. When will we fully recover? By the end of this second quarter, we expect GDP to fully recover, with growth expected over the next couple of years. The unemployment rate and jobs will recover sometime in 2022. Inflation is going to be elevated, as will interest rates. It's a manifestation of the recovery that we're in right now. But it's not something that's going to cause chronic worries going forward. We're concerned about the deficit, but it's something that we're going to have to set aside at the present time as we work through the recovery. But it is something, it's a matter that we should return to when the recovery is behind us and we're on a sounder footing. And California is recovering just a little bit more slowly than the U.S. right now, but it's going to outpace the U.S. economy before too long. And I just want to remind you that California punches above its weight when it comes to the U.S. economy. During the great expansion that took place prior to the pandemic, we contributed somewhere in the neighborhood of 16% of the jobs for the country that were added during that time period, when at the same time we only accounted for 12% of the job stock. So California definitely makes a major contribution to the U.S. and will continue to do so going forward. I thank you and wish you good morning.
My name is Ivan Madera, CEO of Morph 3D. At Morph 3D, we do 3D metal printing for the aerospace and defense industry. So our next move to Long Beach is really to establish the Applied Digital Manufacturing Center. It's a 90,000 square foot facility that's purpose-built with technology partners that are all focused on industrializing this process at scale. So the other reason we're looking to move to Long Beach is most of our customer base is also transitioning to the Long Beach area, and we're looking to do the same.
Hello, I'm Caryn Shenewerk. I'm the Vice President for Regulatory and Government Affairs at Relativity Space. Relativity is headquartered in Long Beach, where we are building humanity's multiplanetary future. By using 3D printing, we're really changing the way that we build rockets in America and in the world. Long Beach has a long history of aerospace and aviation, so it's an excellent place to tap into an amazing talent pool. So we can find people from all over the country that want to be part of the future of aerospace.
I'm Jenna Bryant. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Embedded Ventures. We invest in early companies that are built on top of low-cost rocket launch. So Long Beach has always been known as an aviation hub. But in a way, it's becoming reimagined as not just aviation, but becoming a hub for airspace and critical space infrastructure altogether. So when companies are making those early decisions of, okay, where do we want to be headquartered? I would absolutely encourage early stage founders to consider Long Beach.
I'm honored to introduce one of the stars of our show, Dr. Seiji Steimetz. As professor, chair of economics, and director of the Office of Economic Research at Cal State Long Beach, Seiji is passionate about sharing his department's economic expertise and data-driven information with the local business community and city leaders. As an economist, he has a talent for translating academic research into real-world applications. Seiji was a first-generation college student educated through the California Community Colleges, Cal State University, and the University of California Systems, a true California success story. In the past 15 years, he's been with Cal State Long Beach. His research specialties include transportation and urban and environmental economics, with an emphasis on applied econometrics and methodology. He is committed to taking what he knows and making it accessible to the community, especially through his role in developing the annual Long Beach Latino Economic Report, and of course, through this Accelerate Long Beach Quarterly Economic Forum. We wouldn't be here today without his vision of bringing the community together to talk about Long Beach's economics. That's why I'm proud to introduce my friend, Dr. Seiji Steimetz.
Thank you, Mark, for that generous introduction. Again, I am Seiji Steimetz with the California State University Long Beach, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here, not just because I'm in this beautiful Studio LBP studio in beautiful downtown Long Beach, but for the first time in a year, I don't have to stand here and give you awful news. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through where we are in this economic recovery, focusing on Long Beach and the surrounding region. So let's start with Los Angeles County, and remember that about 79% of the people who work or who live in Long Beach work somewhere outside of the city and work somewhere in the county. So the county is important to us economically here in Long Beach as well. Also, I'm going to focus on employment data because locally that's the best we can usually do in describing where we are in the recovery. So first, let's look at Los Angeles County jobs. So we've all seen this graph before. On the left, I'm showing you total employment in LA County from before the pandemic, so January 2020 up through our most recent month of data, April. And right before the pandemic, there were about 4.5 million jobs in Los Angeles County. And then when the shutdown, the big shutdown occurred in April, we had this unprecedented, precipitous drop in employment, or as my dear colleague Robert Kleinhenz likes to say, we lost the number of jobs that we've gained since 1996 in the county were lost in just a month. Now we could see we've been edging back slowly, and right about here in January, we were at about 4 million jobs. And since January, so looking at how are we starting to recover as things are starting to open up more, as the vaccination rates are starting to climb, employment is up in the county about 3.2% since January. So we're already starting to see good gains. 128,000 jobs have been added. By the way, this little blip here, this drop, that's just a seasonal effect as temporary workers are hired for the holidays and laid off shortly thereafter that. So on balance, we've recovered about 128,000 jobs since the beginning of the year, but employment overall in the county is still down almost 10%. So this is what I'm foreshadowing throughout this talk, cautious optimism. Things are definitely getting better, but we still have a long ways to go. We have 437,000 fewer jobs than before the pandemic, and we still need to pick those up. Now, what specific industries are leading the charge? So looking again at job growth since the beginning of this year, and you've probably heard this in the news, accommodation and food service and arts, entertainment, and recreation. These industries are far and away leading the charge in terms of job recovery. In accommodation and food service, so these are our restaurants and hotels, we've seen 61,000 jobs added in just that sector in LA County just this year. These two sectors together, accommodation and food service and arts, entertainment, and recreation, collectively these are known as the leisure and hospitality industries. So we're seeing big gains there. We're seeing still continued gains in healthcare and specifically more in social assistance. Personal care and other services. So these are our laundry services. These are the hair salons, the nail salons. They're starting to recover at a more brisk pace this year than, say, before, in December when the status of the pandemic was still unclear. Also, information is showing gains. That's where our motion picture and sound recording industries are, and those are especially important in Los Angeles County. Now, sort of the theme here, though, is that it's the hardest hit industries that are leading the charge. So since, again, the beginning of January, we've seen 22% gains in accommodation and food service, 27% in arts, entertainment, and recreation, personal care and information, strong gains. So while we should be happy that these hardest hit industries are bouncing back, we should also understand that you get large percentage increases when you start with a smaller number. So part of why we see these industries coming back so quickly is because they were hit so hard at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout. Now, we could look at some specific sub-industries or specific types of businesses within these industries, because I know the words accommodation and food service aren't exactly exciting to hear. So, for example, if we talk about full-service restaurants, sit-down restaurants, we've seen 50% employment growth just this year in full-service restaurants. Accommodation also is showing very strong growth in employment. Limited service restaurants, not so much, because we relied pretty heavily on these takeout places, fast food places anyways, during the quarantine. Arts, entertainment, and recreation, we see leading that sector is amusement, gambling, and recreation. They want to get back to their entertainment and their gambling, 59% increase there. Performing arts and spectator sports are starting to edge back as things cautiously start to reopen. Same thing with museums and historical sites, not opening as quickly, but starting to head back. Again, we mentioned personal and laundry services, large gains, 18% employment growth in that area. And religious and civic organizations are starting to trail back as we start to reopen. Healthcare mostly recovered by the end of last year, so we're seeing kind of flat or modest gains in healthcare. Social assistance, in particular child care. All right, child daycare services is seeing a large growth in employment as things start to open up, and that's especially important in getting part of our labor pool back. Information, I mentioned motion picture and sound recording, again 9% growth in that sector, which is very strong for just the last few months. Dr. Kleinhenz mentioned that transportation and warehousing has been more or less booming, especially as we've been relying on online purchasing and alternatives to face-to-face interaction with our community. So we're not going to see very big gains in that sector because they've mostly recovered. Notably is an increase, though, in transit and ground passenger transportation. So people who were taking buses and public transportation before are starting to get back onto those buses. Now look in red here, we have couriers and messengers. Now if you attended the last Accelerate Long Beach event and listened to my talk, you probably heard me say that there was about a 30% increase in employment in couriers and messengers compared to before the pandemic. And that's because during the quarantine, of course, we were relying heavily on our Instacart drivers and Grubhub drivers. Like lots of food delivery services were keeping us fed and as we were sheltering in place. Now we're starting to see the pendulum swing back a little bit. So there's drop-offs now in employment as we can now start substituting back into, for example, for full-service restaurants. In retail trade, kind of flat right now across the board. Notice that general merchandise and supercenters, so these are our large discount warehouse clubs, they're starting to see considerable declines in employment, partly for that same effect that I'm talking about, partly for the same reasons that we're seeing declines in employment in couriers and messengers. We are transitioning back from, when we were in lockdown, we had to find other ways to take care of ourselves. And now that we're opening up, you see the pendulum swinging back a little bit. So where are we overall in this recovery? So let's look at let's compare to January of 2020. So what is the employment level now compared to just before the pandemic? And if we look at this chart here, we have arts, entertainment, and recreation, and accommodation and food services. The employment levels are still 28 and 25% lower than they were before the pandemic. So although these leisure and hospitality industries are indeed leading the charge back to recovery, they are still the hardest hit. Employment is still, in those two industries, is still depressed below pre-pandemic levels or any other of these major industries. Same thing with personal care and other services, state government education, including where I work, information sector with motion picture and sound recording. Right? These sectors are still gradually and perhaps struggling a little bit to recover. So things are getting better, but we're pretty far from fully recovered. Except for maybe in some of these industries we see down here at the bottom. So finance and insurance, construction, healthcare. I would say that these industries are mostly recovered in terms of employment. Now, one thing we can't overlook, and I know I harp on this every single time, but we just can't look, we have to consider that there is a disparate recovery trajectory for many different people in our community. And in particular, if we look at job growth or employment levels compared to pre-pandemic levels, if we parse that out by income group, we're going to see a much different effect or a much different recovery trajectory for these different income groups. So for example, if we look at this green line right here, that's showing the employment trajectory compared to January of 2020, right? So compared to just before the pandemic, that's showing the employment level up until the end of last month, or the beginning of last month. We see that for earners earning more than $60,000 a year, employment is actually up. So there's a 1.4% increase in employment in LA County compared to before the pandemic. For middle, sort of, I shouldn't call them middle, for those earning between $37,000 and $60,000 a year, employment is down a little bit compared to before the pandemic, but mostly recovered. And in each case, you see for these two income groups, for people earning more than $37,000 a year, we've seen some bumpy road, but mostly an upward trajectory. Now let's compare that to the red line. The red line is earners who make less than $37,000 a year. Now, $37,000 a year is the median wage rate in Los Angeles County. So we're talking about half of the working population in Los Angeles County is following this red trajectory. We all know from before, and especially if you've seen Dr. Kleinhenz and I talk before over the last year and a half, it's the low-income earners that got hit the hardest and have been struggling the most to recover. But if we pick, say, we're in June now, let's pick June of last year. This is the employment level compared to January of last year. The employment level has not really climbed. Again, so job growth is definitely there in Los Angeles County, but for the lower half of the earning distribution, the job growth hasn't really appreciated much since just this last year. I mean, since June of last year. So this is another example of what we've been citing before as a K-shaped recovery, a lopsided recovery. We're doing well overall, but we still have to keep an eye on what's happening with those who are in the lower income categories, who appear to be struggling to get back to work. So how does that translate to the Long Beach situation specifically? Well, again, we know that unemployment in Long Beach back during the pandemic, we were at low unemployment, 5%, and even a little bit more lower before that. So we had historically low unemployment rates in Long Beach back at the beginning of 2020, and that jumped very quickly to historically high unemployment. And this is our trajectory back towards where we are now at 11.5%. So just to give you some context, back before the pandemic started, there were 12,000 Long Beach residents who were out of work. Right now, there are about 27,000 Long Beach residents who are out of work. So things are definitely better, but still we have more than double the what we would call good times amount of people out of work. Now, unemployment is measured as how many people, what percentage of people who are looking for work do not have a job. The people who are looking for work, that number is called the labor force. And so we might be concerned, the labor force has been jumping around too. We see that there were dips in labor force participation and then, a steady rise back. So we want to be careful when we cite unemployment rates that we also keep a measure on what's happening in the labor pool so that we're not just picking up effects of people maybe leaving the labor pool. And people leaving the labor pool with the same number of people employed would actually reduce your unemployment. So looking at this though, we see that Long Beach has nearly recovered its labor force. Long Beach labor force right now is about 239,000 compared to about 243,000 just before the pandemic. So the labor force is back, they're ready to work. Now it's just a matter of getting the rest of those in the labor force back to work. So how does our unemployment rate of 11.5% in Long Beach compare to the rest of the region? And in California, of course, it's higher. It's consistent with unemployment rates in Los Angeles County, but slightly higher than in Orange County, San Bernardino County, and so forth. San Bernardino and Riverside, for example, a big part of their economy is transportation and warehousing and supply chain logistics industries. And as Dr. Kleinhenz mentioned, those industries did quite well weathering the pandemic, and we're seeing that reflected in their relatively low unemployment rates. And we could talk a little bit later about why Los Angeles County and Long Beach in particular has a higher unemployment rate than some of the surrounding cities in the region. But if you look at this heat map I've created here, a darker area, right? You're comparing colors here. A darker area means higher unemployment rate than in Long Beach. So if you look at the composition of LA County, right? LA County is a very socioeconomically diverse region. And we are home to some among Southern California's lower income residents too, which also would then explain on balance why we might have a lower unemployment rate. a higher unemployment rate. Now, what I like to use, considering how little data we're going to have on things like gross regional product and output at the local level, what I like to do as my bellwether is look at unemployment insurance claims, right? If people are filing unemployment insurance claims now, and by that I mean initial uninsurance employment claims, right? That means that if we have a high initial unemployment claims rate right now, that means we're going to have higher unemployment in the future. Again, looking at this trajectory, we had a staggering number of claims per week in initial unemployment claims throughout the beginning of the pandemic, and that's tapered off. But right now, we're at about 3 times normal the weekly claims rate for unemployment. So again, that's 3 times is a lot, but much, much better than where we were before. During the peak of the pandemic, the claims rate was 31 times normal. Now we're at about 3 times normal, with the most recent month giving us about 5,700 new claims in the city. Now, let's keep in mind while we're talking about disparate recovery paths, looking at these unemployment insurance claims data, throughout the pandemic, women in the labor force have suffered a disproportionately high burden of this pandemic. This red line is the unemployment claims rate for females. The blue line is the unemployment claims rate for males. Right now even, the female claims rate is 3.7 times normal for females, whereas for males it's about 2.9 times normal. So we're seeing that females are bearing the brunt, or have been bearing more of the brunt of the unemployment, and perhaps we could talk about that when we sit down with the publisher of the Long Beach Post and Long Beach Business Journal, David Sommers. Looking forward to chatting with him. Maybe we could explore that a little bit. So where are we again now? If we look at in our most recent month of data in May, in which industry, looking by industry, what are the claims rates now compared to before the pandemic? That is, we'll call the pre-pandemic level unemployment claims rate, let's call that normal. Right now in arts, entertainment, and recreation, personal care and other services, accommodation and food services, right, those claims rates are still 6 to 12 times higher than normal. So again, these leisure and hospitality, personal care, other services, these face-to-face industries are indeed leading the recovery, but they're also still the ones that are struggling the most to come back. In fact, one thing we really, and looking at other dimensions of this lopsided recovery, let's look at, for example, arts, entertainment, and recreation, and personal care and other services, the top 2 in terms of unemployment claims rates right now, relative to their normal rates. These unemployment claims are unique in the sense that they include pandemic unemployment assistance, right? So these are small business owners and the self-employed who previously wouldn't have qualified for unemployment benefits, but through CARES and other coronavirus relief efforts now qualify. And so what we're starting to see in these numbers too is that the high claims rates in these 2 industries are also partly reflecting the fact that there are large numbers of business owners, small business owners in these categories. For example, in Long Beach, 21% of all of the arts and entertainment and recreation businesses are self-employed, or these workers are self-employed. 26% of all personal care and other services workers are self-employed. And we're starting to get a sense then that as things recover, small businesses are having a little bit harder time. And one way to capture that, looking back at county data for a second, if we look at this green line, again, we're going to compare to normal. We're going to compare what is consumer spending and what is small business revenue compared to back in January of last year. And we see that consumer spending is up. Right now, consumer spending in the county is up about 8%. But small businesses are having trouble recovering that growth. Small business revenue is down, about 30% since the beginning of January, or since the beginning of 2020. So we've seen steady increases in consumer spending, but pretty flat small business revenue. In fact, again, down by 30% right now. And that's especially important to Long Beach because Long Beach, the backbone of Long Beach's economy is small businesses. I know we have some awesome marquee large employers that employ a lot of people, but if you look at the number of establishments in Long Beach, which is about 18,000, 97% of them have fewer than 50 employees. In fact, 88%, almost 90% have fewer than 10 employees. It's clear that the really the lion's share of establishments, of businesses in Long Beach are small businesses. And we have to keep an eye on them as, again, we're seeing that small businesses are recovering a little more slowly than the rest of the economy. So, where do we go from here? How do we go onward and upward? First, of course, until hopefully the next time we speak to you, right now we're still focused on recovery. Right, the regional economy is definitely improving. Unemployment rates are falling. The labor force in Long Beach is nearly back to its pre-pandemic level. And as vaccination rates climb, jobs are returning, especially to those hardest hit industries. But again, cautious optimism is warranted. Employment is still below pre-pandemic levels in every major sector. And the economic recovery is still lopsided. Employment is still lower among lower income workers compared to the beginning of last year. In fact, in this last year, since June of 2020, there hasn't really been an increase in employment for those making $37,000 a year or less in Los Angeles County. And again, that's the median income. So we're talking about half of our income distribution hasn't really seen an appreciable gain in employment in the last year. Also, small businesses are struggling to recover despite gains in consumer spending. Once we recover, once we can start returning back to what we would normally worry about is economic growth, we can start talking about what are the things that are promising for growth. Now, economic growth, if you've heard me say this before, I'm sounding like a broken record. Economic growth is accelerated by expanding our traded industries. And by that, when we produce things here in Long Beach and we sell them to the rest of the world, when we sell goods and services to the rest of the world, that's how we improve our economic growth and economic prosperity. Right? We can't get rich selling things to ourselves. We have to sell things to other parts of the world. Now, one really promising example of opportunities for economic growth is this new space innovation ecosystem we have in Long Beach. Or I shouldn't say new, I should say re-emerging space innovation ecosystem, which is known lovingly as Space Beach. Right? Space Beach is a promising example of bolstering Long Beach's traded cluster of industries. Aerospace innovators that are recently headquartered in Long Beach include Virgin Orbit, Rocket Lab, Relativity Space, Spin Launch, and even more recently, Morph 3D. Right, we're starting to see a lot of marquee, right, really big players in the space industry agglomerate around our city. And this is fancy secret data. We could look, for example, at the trajectory of Long Beach aerospace employment in our city. People are under the impression that Long Beach aerospace kind of disappeared for a while after the C-17 project left. And that's just not the case. There was a decline. So compared to, say, back in 2008, yes, we've seen a decline in overall employment in aerospace, but very recently, in fact, in just the last 3 years, we've seen a 48% increase in employment in our aerospace sector. And that's just looking at this narrow cluster of aerospace industries. So I'm in that narrow cluster, there's over 4,000 jobs in Long Beach just in aerospace. And some people I trust and admire a great deal over at the Pacific Gateway Innovation Workforce Innovation Network, they estimate that if you include parts of the supply chain in aerospace, that we have around 6,500 jobs right now in aerospace. In fact, if we look at, in the green line, we have the total share of payroll in aerospace. That is, aerospace's total payments to employees compared to all of Long Beach. And down here in the blue line, we have total employment compared to all of Long Beach. We see that even right now, right, aerospace's share of employment in Long Beach is 2.7%. Well, that's about the same as our total employment in food and beverage stores. Our total payroll, 5.2% share in aerospace, that's about the same share of payroll as like restaurants and bars. So aerospace in Long Beach never disappeared. It declined, but it's still strong and bouncing back according to these data. And of course, let's not forget that aerospace is enjoying proximity to one of the nation's premier producers of engineers. The California State University Long Beach has increased its production of engineers by 140% over the last year, and it's consistently among the nation's top 40 in the nation in producing engineering degrees. We're also close to other schools that produce a lot of engineers. UC Irvine ranks in the top 10 traditionally, and UCLA ranks in the top 50. Those are okay schools too. So, Space Beach, that's kind of our focus of today, and definitely a worthy focus because that's a promising aspect of our possible future growth in a traded sector. Right, Long Beach's aerospace industry never disappeared. It's always had a relatively large share of employment and payroll in the city. And Long Beach checks all of the boxes for a thriving space innovation ecosystem. We got a skilled workforce, right? We have an established supply chain in aerospace and those related industries. Got a lot of real estate around the airport too. We have lots of available real estate for R&D and manufacturing. Proximity, of course, to amazing universities like Cal State Long Beach and others. And let's not forget a diverse and dynamic urban setting in which to live and work. So, and keep in mind too that a thriving space beach, a thriving traded industry will uplift our local businesses by generating more customers for them. I will leave it at that. So thank you for listening. Go Long Beach, go Space Beach, and go Beach. And we will be right back.
Accelerate Long Beach, Space and Technology. Presented by Boeing and brought to you by Long Beach Economic Development Department, Downtown Long Beach Alliance, California State University Long Beach Office of Economic Research, and the Port of Long Beach.
Join us next time for Accelerate Long Beach, focused on the healthcare and biotech industry. September 16th, 2021. For more details, stay tuned to lbep.org/accelerate.
Welcome back to Accelerate Long Beach, the quarterly economic forum from the Long Beach Economic Partnership. I'm David Sommers, publisher of the Long Beach Post and Long Beach Business Journal. We're here at our studios, newsroom, and intergalactic headquarters here in beautiful downtown Long Beach. You've just heard from our guardians and seers of the local economy, our expert economists, Robert and Seiji. Doctor. It's now time to dive a little deeper. Fascinating presentations. Can I offer you a snack first? Keeping with our theme today, we've got moon cheese over here. We've also got some astronaut ice cream. This was my personal favorite. Just in case you get hungry, those are there for you. Stay away from the moon cheese. It does not taste like the moon, surprisingly. No? All right, let's get into this. First off, the economy. What the heck, guys? But seriously, Robert, you said that the U.S. would fully recover lost GDP by the end of the quarter, the second quarter of 2021. But how far do we actually need to go to get us back on that pre-pandemic growth trajectory?
Right. Well, so for the last several months, last several quarters, we've been fixated on recovering the GDP that was lost during that first part of last year. And that's where we should have had our focus for the last several months. But we now need to really take a look at where we need to be if we want to return to where we were just before the pandemic hit us. And as I said, we're looking at some pretty robust growth this year and next year. And it looks like, as I said in my remarks, we'll recover the lost GDP by the end of this month, essentially, when we get the report in early July. It'll probably be about this time next year by which we recover all the GDP that we lost and then move back to the trajectory where we were growing up to the point where we had the pandemic. We were growing by about 2% per year in 2018, 2019, maybe a little bit faster than that. So if you trace that trajectory out, it sounds a little bit like aerospace. You trace that trajectory out and you ask where we're going to intersect with that trajectory with our recovery. It's probably sometime in the second quarter, maybe the third quarter of next year.
Seiji, you spent some time talking about the hospitality industry. Now that you're fully vaccinated and now that we're getting closer to that 70% herd immunity vaccination rate, have you been out to any restaurants? Are they busy? What are you seeing out there?
I have. I'm sorry if I'm giving a free plug to some of our local businesses, but for the first time, I went to a restaurant with some friends. I went to Saint and Second, and it was on a Tuesday night, and Belmont Shore was packed. And that's economically important, not just because I like to talk about where I eat, but there's all this pent-up demand. And you could see it's palpable if you go down to Long Beach, that the place was crowded, and we closed the place. At the end how they flicker the lights to tell you to get out? The place was completely full, lights flickering, and nobody's getting out. And that really reflects our desire now, and actually what's happening with prices and shortages. We could talk a little bit about that, but there's a considerable amount of pent-up demand that I experienced firsthand.
I do want to go back to unemployment numbers for a minute. You spoke a little bit about how Long Beach and LA County, our numbers, our unemployment recovery numbers, are a little bit different than what we're seeing in the rest of California. You also spoke a little bit about how women have been disproportionately impacted. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that? Why is it different? Why are women impacted differently than men? And why are we seeing things different geographically?
Yeah, so in terms of, and I'll probably ask my dear colleague, Dr. Kleinhenz, to weigh in on this too. In terms of the gender disparity in the employment recovery, I mean, there will be hundreds of sociology and psychology dissertations written in the future about why that's happening. But the traditional response is that women have traditionally borne a greater burden of the child rearing responsibilities, and that's been amplified by the kids having school at home. And so it's harder to go back to work when you have kids who need to be essentially supervised. You're the teacher's assistant at that point. So that probably has a lot to do with it. That combined with the lack of available childcare, of course, right? During the shutdown, they were still operating as essential services, but but in a limited capacity.
Sure.
And in terms of the region, I kind of mentioned this before. You know, we're very lucky that we have a very diverse region, socioeconomically diverse region. But with that comes, you know, we are home to some of the lower end of the income distribution, both in Long Beach and LA County. So that's going to pull some of the employment rates down. As I showed, it's the lower end of the income distribution that's struggling more to return to work. But also, we have a lot, Dr. Kleinhenz mentioned this in his talk. We have, for example, a much larger share, both in Long Beach and LA County, compared to other regions. We have a larger share of full-service restaurants, for example. It's a great place to visit. Long Beach is a great place to visit. LA County is a great place to visit, to dine and shop. And ironically, we're suffering the most. But these are the industries that are getting hit the hardest. We've been suffering the most because we're the most interesting place, the greatest place to come and eat and play.
Robert, your thoughts?
Well, so picking up on that, as we look ahead through the balance of this year, with June 15th now 2 days behind us and reopening many of these venues over the next several weeks or months here in Los Angeles County and other parts of Southern California, we should really see a substantial boost in both leisure and hospitality employment and in all of these improvement in all of these stress indicators that we've been talking about for the last year. So we're fortunate at this stage to be able to look ahead and say growth is ahead of us. We've faced down some very nasty numbers over the last year. The individuals working in leisure and hospitality have been so hard hit. A lot depends on our proclivity as individuals to get back and get re-engaged with our economy in these face-to-face industries. So, getting out to get your hair cut or going out for other personal services, as well as inviting visitors to come to Southern California and Los Angeles County for all of the tourism aspects that we have to offer. So we're on the good side of the recovery mode right now, and I think we should be able to speak quite positively about 2021 when we look back on it in a few months.
Robert, the next question will be for you, and I do want to remind everyone joining us for Accelerate Long Beach, if you have questions for our two economists, feel free to add them in the chat, and we'll try and get to as many questions as possible. But as questions are starting to come in, Robert, the next question that I want to run by you is, do you see any permanent changes coming in the way that business will be conducted post-pandemic? What's going to be different on the other side of this now that we are starting to see the other side of this?
So one thing to keep in mind is that many of the things that we embraced, I guess you could say, over the last 15 months or so while we were working from home and spending so much time at home, but still trying to keep the lights on both in business and at home. Many of these things already existed, right? We might have had a subscription to Netflix, but all of a sudden we were binge watching. Similarly, we might have had a subscription to Amazon.com, but now we found ourselves buying anything and everything, including the kitchen sink, through Amazon.com instead of going shopping in person. Same way with video conferencing, Zoom, WebEx, things like that. All of those existed before. I mean, I remember doing video conferencing right after 9/11. That was 20 years ago. So a lot of these things already existed, but as I say, many of us had to embrace these in order to keep moving forward. Some of that is going to stick, But I do expect that people are going to return to offices. There may be some more flexibility with respect to working part of the time at home versus working part of the time at office. And of course, certain kinds of activities have to be conducted at the workplace. So yeah, some of this is going to stay with us. I still think that it's an open question as to how much. But I do think, we're, as consumers, no matter what age you are, you've suddenly found yourself being quite tech savvy when it comes to pressing that order button. That's here to stay. So those kinds of consumer patterns, I think, are here to stay. But as far as office, the office sector of the economy and its recovery, we'll find out in the coming months, I think, just exactly where the chips are going to lie. It's a little bit too early to say, even though I've heard a lot of prognostications.
Sure. This next one just says Bitcoin ? I'm going to go ahead and skip that one. I don't know how that got in there. We've got a question from the audience. Let me pose this, and whoever wants to jump in. There's a lot of talk about how hard it is to fill service and hospitality jobs, blaming the, quote, relatively generous unemployment benefits people are still getting. How much of a factor do you think that really is? And that speaks to some of the questions that we were actually going to speak to about how difficult it is to fill some of those jobs. But is that an issue that you're seeing about the generous unemployment benefits? Is that a factor in how difficult it is to fill some of those jobs?
So I'll go first. And I mean, this is a contentious issue, and there's no consensus among economists about the degree of the unemployment benefits contribution to this. On one hand, yeah, okay. So what they're likely referring to is, nationally at least, there's a relatively large number of people in the workforce who on unemployment benefits are earning more with the supplemental benefits than they did in the job that they were laid off from or left. And maybe there's something there. There's obviously a disincentive to work to some extent. We can't completely discount that. But what people need to understand is the labor market is very tight right now. I talked about this pent-up demand. I talked about what was going on at St. and Second. I mean, have you tried renting a car right now? No. Nobody could predict how quickly we were able to deploy these vaccinations, except for maybe Long Beach. Long Beach is like the model of deploying vaccinations. But nobody, you're not going to make your hiring and inventory decisions based on what you think the pandemic level might be next month, right? So you're going to be a little bit cautious. And now that things are under control, we're heading towards that 70% immunity rate in Long Beach. The demand is outstripping supply. I know I'm an economist. I'm giving you a very long answer, but this is a difficult question.
I was reading about how some people are renting U-Hauls to get around in Hawaii these days because there's no rental cars available.
So what I'm getting at here is that everybody's hiring. All right, it's not just the leisure and hospitality industries. Everybody's hiring, especially those in previously face-to-face industries that are returning. So it's not so much that those who are getting unemployment benefits just don't want to go back to work. They don't want to go back to work for you at that wage, right?
And do keep in mind, if you take a look at the numbers of job openings, about 9.3 million job openings right now. That's roughly the same number as the number of unemployed. So there's a lot of upheaval in the labor market as well as other markets, whether they're markets for inputs or otherwise. So this will get sorted out, and there is a literature that has to do with the impact of the pandemic relief or unemployment, and they've found relatively little impact. So, I think there's a lot of substance to what Seiji says in terms of explaining where we are right now.
Robert, in your presentation, you were talking about inflation, that inflation should be okay, but we're seeing lumber prices go through the roof, no pun intended about going through the roof. Home prices, we spoke, heard in your presentation about home prices rising sharply. Other prices are continuing to be high. How does your inflation forecast account for that, and account for what we're seeing when we go to Home Depot and the price for lumber and other goods?
Right, and I have been to the home improvement store looking at things like lumber prices for home projects we have, and indeed they're a multiple of where they were not too long ago, and we see that in a number of different areas. We also hear that again, we talked about the labor market. In order to hire people, that some establishments have had to increase their their wages. So each of those are examples, individual examples of price increases. When you look at them as a whole, and I presented this, and you account for some of the more variable or volatile parts of our mix of consumption, you account for that in the form of that core inflation. It's still very much in check. 2.5% or thereabouts is where core inflation happens to land. So we got to keep in mind, a lot of people really think that their best inflation indicator is the price of gasoline, which is also something that's gone up. But it's just one part of our entire array of things that we consume. So we just have to be really careful about that and not get fixated on any one price. So yeah, lumber prices are up. Restaurant prices, the menu prices have definitely gone up. But by and large, we're seeing that inflation's edged up as we would expect as the economy's improved, but not really getting out of hand. And I think so many of these are transitory. They'll come back to earth in a matter of weeks or months.
We've got just a couple of minutes left with our economists. We want to get to a couple more questions from our audience. Up next, we want to ask, do you see any impact due to bottleneck or disconnect between job seekers and unfilled positions in terms of growth or wages? Either one of you want to take this one?
I'm happy to jump in. It's related to what we were just talking about right now. So labor markets are super tight. There are, as Dr. Kleinhenz said, there's a job for everyone in the labor pool essentially right now. Now it's a matter of a matching game. And partly what we're seeing is in this past month, people have had a chance to reskill. Also with higher wages and alternative but similarly skilled jobs, people have had an opportunity to look around. So there's a lot of what I might call I don't know, positive friction. Like this is going to end up being a net gain to the economy if people are better aligned with jobs that suit them in the future. But so I guess the answer is yes, right? There's going to be probably a period of equilibration and decision making at the household level, and that could delay the return to work in some industries.
Back to our conversation earlier about leisure and hospitality and the fact that, or what we're hearing about the difficulty filling positions there. So now in addition to wage and working conditions, people have as an additional criterion, and when they're deciding where to work, about the health aspect. And the pandemic is not behind us. We're still actively battling that. So if somebody is leery of returning to a workplace where face-to-face interaction is a part of the routine, they may have gone and found an opportunity somewhere else. So, so much is still in a big state of flux right now.
We've got another audience question. Have some of the LLC waivers and other COVID-related government fee breaks affected new business starts?
I'll start off because I have tracked what has happened in the past with self-employment as we go through the ups and downs of the economy. And the fact of the matter is that in typical recessions, we find that as unemployment rates go up and people are laid off, at least some of those individuals go and start up their own new businesses. So we see new business starts actually pick up somewhere around the same time the economy is kind of hitting rock bottom. And that's regardless of what kinds of changes in policy have taken place. So I think we're likely seeing increases. It's a little hard at this point in time. We don't really have hard data on this sort of thing. Likely seeing an increase in new business starts. I'm not sure that outside of that normal ebb and flow, that any particular policy may have triggered the improvement that we're probably seeing right now. We just aren't measuring it right, are able to see it right now.
Seiji, the next one for you. What do you mean by Long Beach's traded industries versus its local industries? And how you wrapped up your presentation talking about the strength of the aerospace and space technology industries. Talk a little bit further about how a stronger industry in this sector can improve both of those sectors, improve traded industries, improve local industries. How does this benefit everyone? How does this benefit it at all?
So, for example, when things started opening up, I was very excited about the idea of going to get a haircut. That's getting a haircut is an example of typically a local industry in the sense that we don't import a lot of that. A little bit. Maybe some people drive from outside of the county to come get their haircut at a specific place in Long Beach. For the most part, it serves our local customers. And that's a very important part of the economy, but where do you get the money to pay your hairdresser, right? Where's that wage coming from? And at the end of the day, the answer is that we as a, think of us as a collective of businesses and entrepreneurs together working to sell things to the rest of the world. And the way we generate income is by selling to the rest of the world. That's why I get so excited about Space Beach. Now, the part about why is that so important again to our local industries though is that's what generates the customers, right? If you fill Douglas Park with space pioneers, that's going to create a lot of demand, a lot of money, and a lot of customers for the local hairdressers and the restaurants and so forth.
So I want to put you on the spot with two last questions. As we're looking forward in the economy, as we're thinking about robust industries like what we're seeing in Douglas Park, if there was one piece of advice, one recommendation that you would have for our economic development staff, for our city leaders, as they're trying to set plans, make decisions, what would be the piece of advice that you would give them? What's the decision that you would encourage them to make? What do they need to be considering to make our economy that much more robust as we move forward? What counsel would you give them?
You want me to take a crack at that?
Yes, give them a piece of free advice.
This is a tough one, and I think that even in the short amount of time we have to discuss it, we're not even going to do justice to this. There are two things. We've just talked about the importance of traded industries and economic growth to fuel the economic vitality of the city and its population. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact that the city has a whole array of amenities that its residents enjoy. So it really has to strike a balance between making sure that these local industries that serve the local population are well taken care of, I guess you could say, and at the same time do what it can to promote the growth of these traded industries. And here we're not just talking about aerospace. We've got of course, we've got the port, so transportation logistics. Tourism is a very important part of our local economy. And we don't really think about it very much, but even Cal State Long Beach, to the extent that it attracts students from outside the area, can be an important source of growth. So it really has to have engage in this balancing act between, fostering growth amongst its local serving industries, even as it tries to promote growth among these traded industries.
Excellent.
And I'll add, we talked to John Keisler at the at our Long Beach Economic Development Department, Nick Schultz over at PG Win, the Economic Development Commission led by Walter Larkin. I'm very proud of our department and Cal State Long Beach's engagement with our community and the extent to which we regularly meet and give counsel to our economic development agencies and to our city leaders. So, if free advice, giving them on TV, we've been giving them free advice and in a good way, right? This is the town-to-gown relationship we've built that we're very proud of. So I couldn't tell you anything that they haven't already heard from me, but I could say that we are in complete alignment in the city's vision of growing the economy, but in an equitable way. This city is remarkably careful about making sure that the distribution of the growth is fair. Mm-hmm. And so I would say keep doing what you're doing and keep listening to us too, of course.
Gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Robert, Seiji, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your presentations. We'll look forward to having you back here in September. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to take a closer look at some more great things going on in our local industry. We'll be back with Accelerate Long Beach in just a few minutes with another great panel.
Because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Long Beach is incredibly rich in aerospace history.
In the 1940s, when we were starting out as Douglas Aircraft, many of our employees were actually women.
Well, just after the opening of our historic terminal building, the bombing of Pearl Harbor brought the United States into World War II. In addition to building the planes, local women were also flying the planes. Long Beach was home to a unit of the Women's Auxiliary Service Pilots.
After World War II, Los Angeles and Long Beach were booming aerospace areas, and the call went out from aerospace agencies that they needed more employees. They needed skilled, educated employees, and that was when the space race began. So the college was starting at the same time.
The top of the 36-story tall Saturn V moon rocket. We have commenced. We have
In the 1950s, we shifted our operation in Long Beach to commercial aircraft, starting with the DC-8. When McDonnell and Douglas merged, we then began development of the DC-10, and in 1970, the DC-10 had its first flight out of the Long Beach airport.
We have brought our remote unit here for the first flight of the new DC-10 wide-body jet.
We're speaking to you from the Long Beach Airport Tower. This is Michael Rye, and from our vantage point, we will be bringing you reports of the important moments as they occur.
As we progressed in the 1980s, we had the C-17.
That was produced here in Long Beach for many years, and in fact, is still supported by the team here out of Long Beach, sustaining that aircraft for the Air Force in the United States and other air forces around the globe. In the 1990s, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas, continuing a legacy of over 65 years of aircraft production.
Innovation runs in the blood of Long Beach.
I came back to school specifically to do rockets and spacecraft.
So this is a 3D printed model. It's a regenerative liquid rocket engine.
Oh, here you are, little beauty.
We have a long history of interacting with our local aerospace companies and local technical companies as well.
My vision and dream would be to see a vibrant and thriving industry that is powered by coveted graduates of Cal State Long Beach.
Long Beach was a very unique opportunity because very few places even give students that chance, and the ability to actually work with liquid rocketry is so valuable. There's no undergraduate curriculum anywhere that gives you the same experience.
Whether it's Earl Duarte using our sandy beaches as a runway before we had an official airport, our Rosie the Riveters answering the call to support the war effort, or our current hub of aerospace companies that are forging a new frontier forward, Long Beach is always at the forefront of innovation and change for the aerospace industry.
Welcome back to Accelerate Long Beach, the quarterly economic forum from the Long Beach Economic Partnership. I'm David Sommers, publisher of the Long Beach Post and the Long Beach Business Journal. We're here for our next panel. We've got a great panel. I'm not going to go through their entire bios. Please go to lbp.org/accelerate to read more about them. These are three extraordinary leaders with extraordinary backgrounds, with extraordinary commitments to Long Beach, doing great things for our city. lbep.org/accelerate. But let me introduce you first to Mandy Vaughn. She's the CEO and founder of GXO Inc., which she founded earlier this year to accelerate the pace of change across the space industry. Dana Beer is the Director of Sales and Marketing for M4 Engineering. And we also have Lars Hoffman, who is the Senior Vice President of Rocket Lab, where he's responsible for the global business and government affairs at Rocket Lab. Mandy, I want to start with you and telling us a little bit more about your work, your company, your history. And for all of you, is how did you land in Long Beach? Why is it important that your business is here, and why you chose here?
Sure, so I can answer that in kind of two halves. First is why GXO? So I had the absolute privilege of working with Vox Space, which is a subsidiary of Virgin Orbit for the last 4 years, and then I was with Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit for years before that. So really got to see the stand-up of Virgin Orbit here in Long Beach, which was amazing unto itself. But why GXO was watching this whole new ecosystem of these commercial space companies all over the LA basin in Southern California that are trying to get into this government and national security sector. How do we help them strategically, technically, from the management side? And I realized we really need to accelerate the pace of change across this community. And so why Long Beach? Long Beach is just kind of the perfect sweet spot within this space beach, as we've already talked about today, in Silicon Beach, that as companies are ready to start to scale, where do they go? When you're moving from the garage to where do you need an actual footprint to build something? Long Beach is just kind of the sweet spot. So I'm working with a slew of fun commercial startups that are some in that manufacturing state and some about to get there, and they're making those trades right now on where do we want to go, where do we want to be when we grow up. So it's a super exciting time, and I think we're just on the precipice of an amazing run here as an industry and as a community.
Dan, how about you? When we first spoke, you were traveling. You travel quite a bit, but home is here in Long Beach. Company's in Long Beach. Why Long Beach? What's the history? Why here?
Yeah, so our founder is Dr. Miles Baker. He was working at McDonnell Douglas, later Phantom Works. He led the loads group there, and he decided to go out on his own because he wanted to, do the entrepreneurial thing. He got an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant, and gradually started building up momentum and actually recruiting interns. Like one of the things that he started, his business model was to bring in students, Ph.D., master's students, bachelors, and start developing them and grow them into full-blown engineers. Our team is actually, our management team, I think with the exception of one person, actually grew through the internship process at M4, so our engineering services have expanded beyond government work. We do about 70% commercial work, helping companies design, analyze, optimize different vehicles. We also do work with renewable energy, and Mandy mentioned startups. We do a lot of work with startups, not just with commercial space, but also urban air mobility, supersonic travel, things of that nature. And it's really a great place because there's a great ecosystem of resources to pull from. So whether it's Cal State Long Beach, as far as a feeder for internships, or being able to even pull from El Segundo or neighboring areas where there's a big aerospace infrastructure historically.
Lars, you've got fascinating career history and personal background. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your trajectory and why Long Beach.
Yeah, great opening there, Dave. So I grew up in this area, actually in Harbor City. My dad was in the Air Force, attending school at USC at the time. And so I grew up in this area, going to the Queen Mary, going to the beaches, and fell in love with the area. I followed a similar path, going through the Air Force for 26 years, living around the world. When I retired, I came back to this area because of the location, the environment, the climate, but also because this is a concentration of aerospace and defense and space in particular. I was lucky enough to land a job with SpaceX, so I worked there for 4.5 years, watched their dramatic growth during that time, but also learned about a company called Rocket Lab, which was really just starting to take off at that point in time in 2018, transitioning to 2019. Joined Rocket Lab in January of 19 and helped Rocket Lab settle into Long Beach, into our headquarters here, right on the Long Beach airport. And it's an exciting time. The reason that we're here is because of the talent in this area. And that's your most valuable resource for companies like ours. The talent pool here is deep and it's wide. And that's what you need to be successful in a rapidly growing industry that we're in. And so we're very excited and very happy to be here. And we were very welcomed by the Long Beach local government as well as we settled into our new headquarters. And we're up and running full steam.
Somebody, we were speaking earlier about the proximity to LA Air Force Base. I think it's out of sight, out of mind that when you don't have a bunch of runways and jets flying around, you don't realize that the importance of LA Air Force Base. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the proximity of LA Air Force Base, what's happening there, the connection to the growing Space Force and Space Command? Why is it important to be close to LA Air Force Base? Mandy?
Sure. So no, LA, and I'm an alum of LA Air Force Base. I was up there as a captain for a few years, so it's a great group. It's really the center of procurement for all things space, whether it's rocket, satellite engineering, satellite ops, the ranges, about $9 billion a year of R&D and procurement funding are managed by the staff up there that do a phenomenal job. GPS, communications, space situational awareness. So it's all things that are military space, which is great to have that footprint right here in the middle of all of this in the industrial base, in the ecosystem. But even more so, it's a good tip of the hat to the future of the base and its strength here. The Space Force was stood up back in 2019, and they are now through this summer going to transition the Space and Missile Systems Center to be the Space Systems Command for the Space Force. So they're actually going to be increasing the scope of their responsibility right up the road here at LA Air Force Base. So it's a great group of people with a very important mission, and to have just kind of the hub there to where you can have quick decision making and discussions with the customer base and the technical staff that support them. It's just a great anchor right here within the area too. So I think there's not one of us that don't have, between ourselves and our clients and our support, where we're up there on a regular basis.
I want to talk a little bit about workforce pipeline. Dan, we'll start with you. We've heard a lot today about the rich workforce pipeline and support in finding the people that you need in the types of careers that your companies employ, especially in rapidly emerging industries like yours. So many of the jobs you're trying to fill didn't exist a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. How do you find the talent that you need to fill those jobs? How do you make sure that students, as they're coming through schools, are getting the skills that your companies that need, that the companies that you partner with are getting what they need? Dan, you had a really interesting answer about how deep you're reaching into local schools. Let's start with you about how you're working to get you the people that you need.
Sure. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier to someone when we're behind the set, that a lot of these programs are very long-term. Right, so it's not something that you necessarily need, 500 people tomorrow. You need 5 people, then 50, then 500. So playing the long game, trying to develop interest and develop the workforce and develop even the types of education are needed. You need an ecosystem. And so in Long Beach, we have the high schools, we have the middle schools, we have Long Beach Community College, and we have, of course, Cal State Long Beach. So we have that system. And part of our vision is to try and work with the schools in different ways, from middle school through college, by also leveraging each other. So we'll go in and, let's say, work with Sato Academy, which is a STEM-centric school, or CAMS, which is also a STEM-centric school, and we'll work with their robotics team or their RC and drone clubs or their rocketry clubs. But we reach out to the rocketry club at Cal State Long Beach, and we support them while they're also turning around and supporting the rocketry club at Sato, for example. So you start helping each other grow together. And for example, Sato has a STEM-centric camp during the summer. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, but they actually go into middle schools and recruit people and bring them up. So if we can start exposing children, students, boys, girls, people from different backgrounds, then we're able to start growing these capabilities and the interest from a young age. And as I mentioned earlier, M4 tries to do a lot of internships. So bringing in students at an early age to work with us and expose them to technology and what can be done.
So some of the people that are watching today are job seekers. And Lars, you mentioned when we were talking that Rocket Lab's not just looking for rocket scientists.
Right.
All of your companies, all the companies that you work with have a lot of jobs that are not just necessarily propulsion engineers or rocket scientists. So for the job seekers that are watching, for the students that are out there, how would you recommend, what type of jobs do your companies have? What are you looking for? How would people network with your companies, learn about the opportunities that you have? What are you looking for? How do people learn more?
Yeah, the first stop is to go to any of our company's websites. Ours is www.rocketlabusa.com. You can go there. There's a careers tab. You can go there and see all of the open requisitions that we have, the different jobs. And what you'll notice is our openings are across the spectrum, from different trade skills to engineering to finance, legal. So basically everything that you need to run any effective business, we're looking for those skills as well. Now on the trade side, we don't need people that necessarily have worked in space their whole career, but are really good at what they do, whether it's additive manufacturing or working with composites or electronics. we're looking for people who have that skill set and have that experience that we can bring in, and we can teach them how to build space parts. It's just a little bit different twist on maybe something that they've worked on before. We notice people who have automotive experience do quite well in transitioning. It's high technology and it's transferable to different companies. So that's, I'd recommend to everybody go and check out company websites, look for their careers page or their careers tab, go see what the openings are, start reaching out to the recruiters. The recruiters are trying to find you, go and find them, and you guys can start a great conversation.
Mandy, Dan, how about you? Any advice for job seekers or students coming up about how to engage with the companies that you're with or that you partner with?
Well, we've had students, high school students, for example, reach out to us and ask to shadow and come and learn how to do things. So I would say beyond just for a specific job, if you want to learn more about what we do, just reach out to us and ask. We're always happy to educate people. So if a middle school, for example, wants us to come out and talk about what's happening in aerospace, a lot is happening in aerospace, beyond commercial space commercial launch. There's just a lot of activity. And when you tell people that, in 5 to 10 years, there are going to be air taxis or flying cars, they look at you like, what is wrong with you? Where did you come up with it? And we can show them the type of activity that's happening. So I would say if you're curious, reach out to websites, look at industries like organizations like AIAA or Vertical Flight Society, and just start, subscribing to them, and you'll learn a lot about opportunities.
I think to double down on that, the other addition I would make are some of the other organizations like Society for Women Engineers, Women in Aerospace, Women in Defense. There's a couple of other organizations like that where you can then have just access to this network that's nationwide and worldwide in many cases, as well as some of the really cool internships that will help match you with a company that maybe you haven't heard of. Like I know some of the big ones local here are the Brooke Owens Fellowship for women that are interested in aviation or aerospace, or the Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship, which is interested in commercial space. Okay. So a lot of our companies are involved in that, to where you can really meet this cohort of students and get access to these companies that maybe you haven't even heard of yet. So there's tons of opportunities. So we're happy to make connections too.
I appreciate that. I want to take a step back about 15 years into the past. About 15 years ago, there was a point when it seems like people were writing off mass manufacturing in Southern California. We were seeing, one of the first big things I worked on when I came to Southern California was fighting the BRAC effort to shut down LA Air Force Base. We were seeing the slowdown of the C-17 production line right up here. But there has been such an incredible resurgence. It's very different today from where we were 15 years ago. Why is it so different now? What's happened? Mandy, you talked a little bit about that commercial and defense used to be separate. All three of you work in a space where that is not the case anymore. What's different today from where we were 15 years ago?
I think locally here, a big tip of the hat to SpaceX and what they accomplished over the last 15 years to kind of breathe new life into the space industry, that it's not just about the classic companies anymore. And that changed the thinking a bit in the early 2000s. So between that, coupled with the government policy changes of knowing that they have to open the aperture of how they procure things, they need to be able to accept commercially produced things a lot more efficiently and more rapidly for all of our benefit, not just to create more jobs around the area and help new companies get started, but also to deliver things to what the warfighter out there needs to help maintain our economic base and our national security priorities. So I think it's the coupling of both of those. And I'm so happy to see that, not just here in Long Beach, not just in Long Beach, but in general, because it really is a national security thing that we should all think about. It keeps our economy cooking, right? So I think, and you saw it in some of the earlier briefings, I think Richard had a chart showing the amount of VC money in California. And a lot of that's going to smaller companies that are just now starting to build. So for them to be successful, they need to have access to the talent, the skills, and that industrial base to be able to scale quick. So that's where Long Beach is kind of a special place, and happy to see this clock speed accelerating.
Lars, what's different 15 years ago and from 15 years ago to now in Southern California?
Yeah, there has been some changes at a national level. The National Space Policy made a commitment to the commercial industry to really turn the government from a buyer of hardware to a buyer of services. And that's what's spurred a lot of this growth, is now commercial industry can develop their technologies and offer their services to the government as a customer, as they do to other customers, commercial customers, or in the government, you got national security and you got civil space with NASA, and we're able to sell our launch services in this case, or our spacecraft services and data services to our government customers, just like commercial customers. So it's really spurred a lot of growth and innovation within the commercial industry that supports the government customers as well as the commercial customers. And I think that's been kind of the thing that created the sea change, and people like SpaceX took full advantage of that as they accelerated their growth with big contracts from NASA, big contracts from national security customers, as well as their global commercial customers.
Dan, how about you?
So one of the things I was thinking about is that aerospace, 15 years ago was mostly divided into defense and commercial, right? And you kind of had those. But today it's just so much more. And like the advent of commercial launch, like Lars was mentioning, as I mentioned, urban air mobility, supersonic, hypersonic travel. There's all of these drones, delivery. It's just exploded. So when I look at the ups and downs of aerospace, it seems to me it's more of a steady growth where one sector might grow a bit faster than the other, but there's really opportunities. And just mentioning again, like urban air mobility, there's like 400 plus startups in that field alone. So the volume, like the ability to work remotely and to integrate, like we're in touch with companies from around the world that are trying to solve all of the world's problems. So I think that's another thing that's changed, is that we've become a much smaller planet in the last 15 years.
Just a couple last questions for this excellent panel. And again, please do go to lbep.org/accelerate to read more about our panelists, to learn more about their companies. Please check out they are hiring. They're looking for the next generation of talent and continuing to engage here in Long Beach. I do want to talk about something that was in the news last week. Last week, the Senate passed the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which at $250 billion would be one of the largest federal investment in R&D since the end of World War II. It has significant implications here in Long Beach for the companies that you're with and that you work with. What do you think that this means for Long Beach? Mandy, you want to start?
Sure. I think it's the coupling between this bill, a lot of talk with the infrastructure, as well as the baseline Space Force budget. I think all three of those will have significant impacts here in Long Beach. Like one statistic that's kind of fun, so the Space Force's budget had an increase of 13% in its R&D budget. That's huge, right? And that's all the investments in new systems and new technologies and a lot of these new services and new companies to bring things forward. So this is, I think, the coupling of all three of those, we're going to see just huge change here for the good, right? In terms of not just buying the big end products like rockets, but also that supplier base, the control systems, as well as the infrastructure, and just this overall push into R&D in general is just going to be great for all of those small companies in terms of the statistics we saw in the earlier briefings. So this is great for that smaller business ecosystem to get going here.
Dan, what do you think it means for Long Beach?
Well, one of the things I like about Long Beach is that Long Beach is big enough to be dangerous, but small enough to work together. You're not losing each other. Like I can get to Lars's location in 10 minutes from ours, so it's not too crazy. But we actually working with the city of Long Beach, it's convenient, it's comfortable. They're interested in trying to come up with better ways of doing things. And we were part of helping found the Long Beach Aerospace Council. So rather than look at it as me against the whole U.S. government trying to fund stuff, if we can find a way to work together, the city, the different companies, the Aerospace Council, the universities, and go after these budgets and have a bigger vision of not just, I need you to help me fund my project, but rather our project, I think that would be a great way to go about trying to get more money.
We've got about 5 or 10 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about what the future looks like to you. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to seeing in the next 5 or 10 years, even the next year as we're starting to recover from the pandemic? What are the question that I asked our economists, what are some of the things that you would encourage city leaders to do to help your industry grow?
What are some of the things that you need from our city? You've chosen Long Beach. What do you need to continue to grow here? What are some of the things that you need to continue to thrive? What excites you? What do you need to continue to grow? Lars?
Yeah, the earlier presentations by your economists were encouraging. It looks like we're emerging from the pandemic and on an upward slope. So that's all good news. So growth in the local economy, growth in the state economy, growth in the federal economy is all going to help pull us all along and on that upward trajectory. From a local perspective, from a city perspective here, making it a good business environment. And what we've felt, and this is one of the reasons we settled here, is it was a very welcoming business environment to establish our headquarters here. We saw in working with the city, different city government offices, whether it was permitting or licensing, a lot of the friction was reduced and minimized. Even during COVID, they made it very easy for us to get things done. And so we've been able to continue through various phases of building up our headquarters facility, and it enables us to do a lot more for all of our customers, commercial and government customers, going forward as a result. So they've really enabled us from an infrastructure perspective, but this tie into the local community with education and awareness of what's out there, what opportunities are out there. We'd like to hire more local talent. So the more types of events like this where you're getting the word out and pointing people in our direction is going to be an enabler as well. So those, I think, would be the two big areas that over the next 5 to 10 years will really help continue this growth that we're seeing just start.
Dan, how about you, sir?
I think that one of the things would like to see is continuing these type of discussions, bringing together all of the different parties. I spoke with someone earlier about, the urban air mobility, advanced air mobility. Long Beach is very well located to become a central hub for that. So to make it easy for people to get in and out of the air, whether it's from the suburbs into Long Beach or from Long Beach into LA, and mentioning infrastructure. So looking at ways to make it easy for those air taxis to land and take off, and see if we can make accessibility, more renewable energy. That's an area that I think Long Beach is leading. I'd love to see more of that, just because there's an electrification in a lot of the transportation, whether it's ground vehicles. So going back to making sure that it's easy for cars to recharge, or electric, even flying cars to recharge. So things of that nature would be very cool to see.
Excellent. Mandy, how about you? As you're looking 5 or 10 years out, what does the landscape in Long Beach look like to you? What would you like to see happen as you're continuing to advise and accelerate the pace of the companies that you work with? What do you need? What would you like to see?
I'm loving all of the everything you guys said, and the only other thing I would add is it's a Long Beach thing, and it's a national thing too. But really getting into the schools. We really need to get into the schools at the university level and the high school level to say, hey, the space ecosystem, the aerospace ecosystem, there are jobs for you. Whether it's STEM or it's policy or it's graphic artists, we need everybody to take a role up in this, because it's one where we just don't have enough people coming into any of these trades. So I think that would be my one ask of between K through 12 and then also in the colleges, how can we get some people some hands-on experience, have them get exposed to this and realize that, hey, there's a lot and there's a role for you in any one of these companies right here. And a super exciting role too. Yes. And if you need a test pilot for the UAV, let's go.
You know someone?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
How about hypersonic travel? Would that be interesting?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of change recently out at the Long Beach Airport. The closure of the C-17 plant and the Globe Master Plan, the development of Douglas Park, the shift of Gulfstream creates a lot of opportunity. There's been a lot of development out there. There's a lot of opportunity for new development. Let's talk about the airport for a minute, because it is, we spoke earlier in the panel about it creates an opportunity to do things that you can't necessarily do at LAX. You certainly can't do it at Orange County, at John Wayne. What is the benefit of Long Beach Airport as a facility, as an innovation hub, as a place to do what your companies are doing? What does the future hold out there?
So I've told a few people this, but driving to work every day is an adventure. Yeah, coming up the 110 down the 405, I feel like I'm Mad Max on the way in every morning. But it's funny, as I start turning into Long Beach Airport, it's like I've just entered Innovation Disneyland. It just opens up, and Douglas Park is kind of symbolic of that. But as you look around and see the names on the buildings, you realize this is special, this is magic, this is growing. The Long Beach Exchange, that whole area is just a very nice environment for all of our employees. They can walk down the street, they can get a great lunch, they can relax a little bit. So the whole environment there is welcoming and fostering this kind of growth and this kind of innovation that all of us are very excited about. On another level, the ease of getting in and out is something that people notice too. I've had new hires that say, look, I can fly right in, even if I'm working remote from somewhere else, I can fly right in, I can stay right here 10 minutes away, and I can get back and forth to work very easily. You can't find that everywhere, and it's a benefit of being right there on the airport property or near the airport property.
I think the logistics coming in and out, that's only going to become more important.
Yeah.
As we're all starting to see more of the launch vehicle companies, satellite manufacturers, like, hey, let's move our stuff to, because we're going to be flying and having operations all over the world. We can just do that right here from Long Beach. And so it just makes the logistics footprint for any of these companies a lot easier, more streamlined. So this is, it's a great location.
So, we spend a lot of time talking about the marquee companies, the companies with the signs on the side of the giant buildings at Douglas Park. But there are all the other companies in the supply chain. As we do wrap up, I do want to talk about the other firms that are in your supply chain, about what's in the white space in the industry that's hard to fill, that there are dozens and dozens of other companies besides just the big companies in the space. Dan, talk about that, about the supply chain a little bit, if you guys can weigh in as we do start to wrap up, about the rest of the ecosystem besides the giant facilities that are out at Douglas Park, that it's so much more than just a handful, that it is a much broader success story here in Long Beach.
So I would say we're actually part of the supply chain. I mean, we help companies like Rocket Labs or others, make better products faster, cheaper, whatever, higher quality. And we rely on a bunch of companies locally, whether it's machine shops or avionics companies, or even our own network of people who we know, who we used to work with, which we can rely on a materials person or a fracture mechanics person that we can reach out to and just bring them in for a specific project. One company that one of the space companies that relocated here actually came here because of the lack of composite technicians where they originated from it in the Bay Area. And so just knowing that if you come here, if you can't find someone, maybe your neighbor knows someone and they can refer them to you. So that's a thing that we're trying to continue to grow, both in terms of quantity and quality, but also to be able to share that information and learn from each other, which is happening just because there's so many rocket companies here. They're bound to be able to meet over a beer at Long Beach Exchange and say, hey, let's talk about composites, so, yeah.
Lars, Mandy, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, you were talking about the next 5 to 10 years, and it's timely. Right now, the world is turning their focus to the Olympics in Tokyo this summer, and there's a lot of questions and controversy, but it's going to ultimately become the Summer Olympics that we all love to watch and draws the world attention. In 2028, we're going to have host the Olympics here in LA again for the first time in a long time, I think since 1984. And I remember those Olympics and how exciting that was. So I see that as an opportunity for LA and Long Beach to really get a global stage to put their best face forward and best foot forward and show the world what we're doing here on Space Beach or Silicon Beach or the whole local area here. It's just a very exciting and vibrant environment that we have here. And according to our economists, we're on an upward trend, so let's continue that. And that's within the next 5 to 10 years, so that's a very exciting time to be here.
Mandy, you get the last word.
This has been fun. So no, it's fun. But no, I think it's Long Beach is in a great spot, but it is also one where there's a role for everyone in the space and in the aerospace sector, and there's a good role for everyone right here. So whether you're, again, the graphic designer, policy engineer, we need you, and there's exciting jobs, and we're really looking to transform the industry and deliver some amazing capabilities that we all use and need every day. So
Thank you.
Come join. Yeah.
Mandy Vaughn, CEO and founder of GXO Inc., Dana Beer, Director of Sales and Marketing at M4 Engineering, and Lars Hoffman, Senior Vice President at Rocket Lab. I'm sorry I didn't offer you any of the astronaut ice cream or the moon cheese, but you're welcome to take some with you. Really, I mean, they're surprisingly delicious. If not, I'll take them home to my kids.
How are the carbs on it?
I don't know, but it's got a shelf life of years to go.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for us here at Accelerate Long Beach, the quarterly economic forum from the Long Beach Economic Partnership. For all of us at the partnership, our chair, Randall Hernandez, and the entire board, everyone here for the City of Long Beach, California State University of Long Beach Office of Economic Research, our economists here at the Long Beach Post and the Long Beach Business Journal, the Studio LBP team, Dennis Dean, Stephen Smith, thank you to everyone. We'll leave it at that. Go Long Beach.